In this video, we're going to do a hands-on example where we see how to get data over the internet into a Java EE or microservice application. I went through a previous video where I described what we're going to do but didn't show code, and now in this video I'm going to show an example with code. First, let's connect a few dots. We know that we have a controller with the search plants endpoint defined, where we are accepting a search term, and we're going to pass that down to our Specimen service and then the fetch plants method. In our Specimen service, we currently have just an interface into stubs, so we're going to want to start working on an implementation of that interface as well. And then we have a DAO layer. We're going to want to put some low-level networking in that DAO layer. So it might take a few steps to get to where we need to be. But let's go ahead and start with the DAO layer. I'm going to choose new and then class, and we're going to call this network DAO. The idea with this is that we give it a URL and we just get raw string data back. We don't know what the format of the data is. We're going to leave that formatting to something else. So in my network DAO, I'm going to start with the method called request. So we'll say public string request, and we'll say string endpoint throws exception, just like so. So the endpoint is essentially going to be a URI, some kind of universal resource identifier, something like that. So we get a red line, and it's because we are not returning anything, so let's take care of that return statement first. Remember that we want to start with a StringBuilder, because a StringBuilder is a bit more efficient at concatenating strings together over just using the raw string. And StringBuilder is ideal when we are within one thread, not when we're traversing several threads. So this is what we're going to want to do. So StringBuilder SB equals new StringBuilder. And then, and then we will say return sb.toString. Okay, so what's going to happen between line 7 and line 11 is we're going to be assembling the final output. As a matter of fact, let me put a little bit of Java docs so we just remember what we're doing on this method. So return the data found at the given endpoint. A URL or other location where we can find data. Okay, all of the data returned as one string. Okay, now we have the heavy lifting, which is where we need to actually connect to this endpoint. So I'm going to say URL equals new URL, and let's just say endpoint. What we're doing is we're converting this from just a string, which is essentially a representation in characters, to a URL, which is something that's a bit more intelligent about what a URL specifically is. The reason why this is important is we need to use this to open a connection with, let's say, to this URL with our HTTP URL connection. So we say URL.openConnection, and that means let's essentially find out what's there. So URL.openConnection. Okay. This gets a little tricky because we have to cast it. We have to cast it to a more specific type of connection, an HTTP URL connection. And I'll say, if you're watching this video without watching the previous video I walked over what a lot of these terms are. So probably not a bad idea if some of these terms, like, hey, what are you talking about? Probably not a bad idea to revisit that video. So we get a red line here. Okay, I probably should go ahead and finish this line first. So let's say HTTP URL connection, equals like so. Okay, now it says, okay, I know what HTTP URL connection is. It's something that I need to import. So we go ahead and we import that. Now comes the tricky part. We have to use the InputStream, BufferedInputStream, InputStreamReader, and BufferedReader to actually read data from this connection. So let's say URL connection.getInputStream. What this is an InputStream is just reading the zeros and ones. It's just reading the bytes one at a time, but it doesn't know what these bytes actually are. I'm going to right-click and choose Quick Fix. And let's see what it gives us here, because what I want to do is assign to a local variable. There we go. That's exactly what I want. Okay. Now I'm going to say BufferedInputStream, BufferedInputStream equals new BufferedInputStream InputStream, just like so. Now what's the difference here? A buffered input stream is similar to an input stream, but it's actually reading everything into a buffer, kind of like reading it into an in-memory location. And then when you're reading from this buffered input stream, you're reading off of that buffer or that in-memory location, and then it's backfilling it with more data. What's weird is that BufferedInputStream is a subclass of InputStream, but on the same note, you cannot create a BufferedInputStream without passing an InputStream object into the BufferedInputStream controller. That confuses me quite a bit, but nonetheless, that's how it works. So we're getting an issue here, and it looks like it's a misspelling, which is an easy issue to fix. So there we go, we have that one fixed. So with the BufferedInputStream, we're still just dealing with bytes. So let's say read in the bytes. We don't know what to actually do with the bytes. We don't know what data they represent. So for that, we need to read them as characters. And so what we're going to say is InputStreamReader, InputStreamReader equals new InputStreamReader, and then BufferedInputStream. And terminate with a semicolon. Now let's go ahead and add our import here. And underneath this, just like we have InputStream and BufferedInputStream, there's also a BufferedReader that will read an input stream into a buffer. So let's do that one more time. We'll say BufferedReader, BufferedReader equals new BufferedReader, InputStreamReader. And once again, find our import. Normally Control-Shift-O will work to Control-Shift-O will work to automatically import the classes needed. Did I misspell again? And indeed I did. Okay, now let's see if we can fix this import. And there's our import line. Okay, we're finally finished with reading streams upon streams upon streams. Now we need to read one line at a time. So what we'll do is we'll say string input line equals BufferedReader.readLine. So we're simply saying we're going to read one line at a time. While input line is not equal to null, so while we have at least something that is not null, then we're going to say SB append and input line, just like so. So we'll say add this, add a little comment here, add this to our output. Okay, and then input line equals BufferedReader.readLine. So see what's happening here is we're reading the first line before the loop starts. Then within the loop, we keep reading the next line until the next line returns null. And then when we're all finished, we return SB2string. Now, one other thing that we want to remember is that we don't want to leave this URL connection open forever. So I'm going to do a try finally. No catch, just a try. And then we'll indent quite a bit here. And then we'll say finally. And we'll say URL connection .disconnect so we can be a good steward of our resources. So that's interesting. A try finally, what that means is that this finally is going to execute whether we get an exception or not. So no matter what path we have out of this try block, we will disconnect from our URL connection. Now I already said we will throw an exception if we get it. So if we throw an exception, it's simply going to disconnect our open connection and then throw the exception back. If it doesn't throw an exception, it's going to hit this line anyway. Now that we have this network DIO, we can start filling in more of our class diagram here. So we know right now we just have the specimen service stub, not the specimen service actual implementation. We'll need to start working on that. We will also need to make a plant DAO that's an actual DAO. So just a little bit of wiring that I want to do to make sure that this is going to work for us. So click out of here, and then I'm going to right click on my DAO. I'm going to say new, and we'll say class. And for this one, we'll say plant DAO. Note that I'm making the DAO before I make the interface. Not to worry. So for plant DAO, I'm going to say public void fetch. Actually, no, let's say list. And then plant DTO. And then we'll say fetch string search text or something like that. Search filter, I think we called it. Something like that. Okay. Resize so we can see this in high definition. And save. And let's import a couple things. First of all, it couldn't find my plant DTO automatically, so I just went ahead and typed it in manually on line number 2. And now let's go ahead and do an import for Java util list. Definitely Java util, not Java AWT. Because we know that this, well, okay, let's start by satisfying the return type. So we'll say list plant DTO all plants equals new array list plant DTO, and then we'll simply return all plants, which at this time is going to be empty, but it will at least satisfy our method signature. So we'll click and we'll say import array list all plants. Okay, a couple more things we're going to need to do. We're going to need to get access to that network DAO that we just created. So we'll say network DAO, just like so. And we'll go ahead and give that an auto-wired annotation, which means we should give our network DAO a component annotation as well. So let's take care of that just a moment. And just like so. And we've solved for that. Okay, so back to plant DAO. And what we're going to do now is we just want to test some things out. We're not actually going to return a series of plant DTOs yet. We'll cover that in a different video. We just want to see how this works. So we'll say network DAO dot fetch. Request. And for this one, I'm going to put in a JSON URL. So you see, here's a simple URL that we can use. I'll copy this, and we will pass it in as our endpoint. We'll pass it in as a string, just like so. And we'll have time to refactor. At this point, we simply want to verify that our network DAO is working as we want. This is going to throw an exception, so I'll go ahead and add that to our signature. Throws exception, just like so, and save. Right-click, refactor, extract interface, so we can make an interface out of this. We'll call it iPlantDAO, and we'll go ahead and move the fetch method up there as well. And OK. And save. So our DAO layers are now complete. We just have a couple more things that we need to do. We need to make a new specimen service implementation that will call down to this DAO. I'll do this relatively quickly. So new, and we'll say class, and I'm going to say specimen service, and interface we'll add, and we'll say iSpecimen service, just like so, and finish. And this is making our specimen service implementation, which will live along our stub. Remember, the stub is what we made when we just didn't know enough information that we know now about how to actually go out and talk to a network. Now note that it creates our class for us, and because we're implementing an interface, it creates some methods for us, including one called fetchPlants. This fetchPlants method will be fairly easy for us to implement. First of all, let's go back to our plant DAO, just one more moment. Let's give it the @component annotation so that Spring will know to search for this when it does its component scan. And import, and save. Okay, and now let's go back to our specimen service, and let's just pull in an iPlantDAO, plant DAO, just like so, and add our auto wired annotation to it, just like so, and import, and again import. Okay, and now in our fetchPlants method, we will say plant DAO dot fetch, and at the moment we'll just hard code in the word oak. And we can actually just return. We can return the result of this because the return type of the fetch method that you see here is a list of plant DTOs, which is the same thing as the return type of the method that we're currently in. So return plantDAO.fetch. It is more than likely mad at me now because it says, okay, you're not handling an exception, so I'm going to need to add a throws declaration here. Now that does not agree with my interface, so I will likely need to go and modify the interface as well. So we pop back out here, go to my interface, and fetch plants. This will just take a moment. Throws exception, just like so, and save. And we're nearly at the point where we can wire this all the way back up to our controller, and we can actually step through this in the debugger. So let's take a look at that next. I'll go to my controller class, and we take a look here. And this is interesting. Notice that the controller class no longer compiles because it knows that fetch plants is going to throw an exception. So what I can do here is I can simply wrap this with a try catch and do some kind of error messaging in the catch block. So we never want to just print stack trace and end with that. Let's go ahead and return error here. And then we'll need to make, in some future video, we'll make some kind of HTML template that goes in and says, okay, this is what we want to show to the user when there is an error. We should also do some logging here in the catch as well. Now there's one more thing I need to do. We note that from the controller, the specimen service is auto-wired in, and it can essentially be any class that implements this interface iSpecimenService. Well, before this was easy because we only had the stub that implemented this iSpecimenService. But now we have a new class called SpecimenService. To make this qualified for auto-wiring, we simply need to add that add component annotation one more time and add it to the top of this class, save, organize imports, and actually probably best to do the save after we do the organize imports. So let's go ahead and organize imports and save, and then we can start this in the debugger. With the debugger going, I'm attempting to hit the search plants endpoint from the controller, and I see that ellipses light up orange, and it also is telling me that it wants to debug. Now, just to confirm where we are, we're currently in the controller, so this is what's handling this endpoint that we've reached from our browser. I'm going to choose F6 to step over this first line. Now, the next line is going to be a bit more interesting. I'll just zoom up so we can see it in high def. The next line is interesting because we're jumping from the controller down to our service layer, and I'll go ahead and choose F5. Now look very carefully at the tabs before and after I choose F5, because we're stepping into a method that belongs to a different class. So I choose F5, and we see, sure enough, a different class's tab lights up. What class is this? It's the specimen service we made just a few moments ago. And now we see from there we're going to this plant DAO fetch, so I'll F5 into that. And where do we go? We go to the plant DAO that we identified just a few moments ago. So from there, F6, and now let's go into this network DAO request, and I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I notice that I'm not yet saving this to, the return of this method, I'm not yet saving to a variable. And I do want to make sure that it works, so I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to choose inspect, which in the debugger is simply going to execute this line and tell me what it's going to return. Take a look down at the bottom, and you see I'm scrolling a little bit quickly here, but if you notice some syntax there, it looks a lot like the JSON string on the website that I showed earlier. So we can see, sure enough, we are able to get a bit of JSON back. Let's go ahead and step into this with F5, and we see our StringBuilder. We see the endpoint that we've supplied. Let's just remember what that endpoint is. That endpoint is plantplaces.com, blah, 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 blah. We'll go ahead and copy this, and we'll pop that into a browser so we can remember what it looks like. And sure enough, this is the JSON stream that we are reading in. So from this, we create our input stream and our buffered input stream, input reader, buffered reader, and then we read one line at a time. And as we're reading the line, we're adding it to the string builder. And there are several lines here, so I'll F6 several times until I'll finally just click my cursor down at the bottom. Right click, and we can usually do a run to cursor. Maybe we'll do it this way. Run to line, just like so. So that'll wrap up that loop, and that will take us all the way here to the bottom where we can inspect this variable called SB. And once again, no surprise with SB. We'll jump into here a little bit. You see plants ID 5440, genus, can't even pronounce that one, but you see that we have a JSON stream that we're returning back. So sure enough, in this video, we were able to go out. I'll go ahead and choose F8 to tell it to just resume the process. And we don't have a whole lot going on this page. I don't think so just yet. Yeah, nothing to worry about just yet. But nonetheless, in this video, we've seen how to go read data from the internet just as general string data. We see that it's JSON data internally, but we have not yet parsed it. Not to worry, in the next video, we're going to parse it from JSON into a series of Java objects. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.